Hello there. This is Paul Glumaz, and this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. Today is the 29th of November, 2020, and we are now in the middle of the election fraud situation and the court fights that are now going on, and all of the other fights that are surrounding this. Now, we are looking at something very unprecedented. The closest thing to this in the history of the United States, I think, is the year 1775, when the American Revolution began. In fact, Sidney Powell, the lawyer who's bringing a whole bunch of these cases, had just put one into Georgia and Michigan, called this moment our generation's 1775 moment. And I think this is very important to look at that. Basically, with the vote fraud operation that has been put into place, with all of the efforts that have been made over the last several years to destroy the integrity of the electoral system, especially using the lockdown to force these mail-in ballots. And then the whole question of algorithms being used on computer reader machines to read the mail-in ballots. In other words, when you go to a mail-in balloting system, you have to have a machine to read the ballots. If you're not in one of those systems, or you're not in a state where they have a very secure mail-in ballot system that's been operating for a long time, you have to put those ballots through a reader. And this is not the case when you go to an election in person or when you request an absentee ballot. So we're looking at a situation in which these machines, these reader machines, have computer programs, and it is being alleged that there are algorithms being put into the computer programs to cause votes to be for Trump to be counted for Biden, votes for Trump to be dumped. And this is what Sidney Powell is promoting. Now, to all appearances, Donald Trump probably won with a landslide. And there was fraud on all areas and all levels, especially in the swing states. And now that is being challenged. But the difficulty is, how do you get access to the computers, the voting machines? How do you get access to all of the various things to demonstrate it when that access is being blocked? Well, you need, in some cases, you need to be able to, in the process of discovery, to subpoena this in a court case. In a court case, you're allowed to subpoena. So most of the battles that are going on at this point are about whether or not the fraud cases will have that capability to have discovery, to go for to subpoena the evidence. Now, nonetheless, there's statistically and in every which way, there's no way to explain this election other than a massive disenfranchisement of the voters of the nation, and the voters who voted for overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. Now, you take a look at Pennsylvania, because that's a very interesting situation. A law was passed to deal with the mail-in ballots, and the law stipulated that you couldn't count any of the mail-in ballots after a certain point, and that if the mail-in ballots were counted after a certain point, this would nullify the whole mail-in ballot system. That was a law put in by a Republican majority legislature. But the governor is Democrat, the Secretary of State is Democrat, and they took the case to change the law to the state, which went to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court then allowed for the changes that allowed for votes to come in much later, for mail-in ballots to come in at a much later date, and so forth. So this played a major role in determining the election. And a lower state court judge ruled that the case presented by the Trump team had merit, and that this was a violation of the Constitution and a violation of the state law. And perhaps even the state law was a violation, because to have that kind of law, you needed to have a change in the state constitution. So then it went to the same state Supreme Court with a 5-2 Democratic majority, which had earlier ruled unconstitutionally to modify the law, the mail-in vote law, and this was unconstitutional. They have no right to do that, and yet they did it. And now they're claiming that this court case has no standing, not because of any constitutional issue, but because they should have submitted the court case earlier, perhaps before the election. Therefore, it has no standing, because they didn't move earlier to have this court case. Well, the court case is about vote fraud. It's not about it's about the unconstitutionality of the process, and so these are the little games that are being played. So there's a lot going on in all these states, and there's going to be a lot more. Now, one of the more interesting situations, again in Pennsylvania, is that the Republican Senate and some of the representatives had a meeting in a hotel. They had hearings in a motel so that the evidence could be presented to the public, which the courts are denying. And the lead person was Senator Doug Mastriano, and it was held in Gettysburg. And the reference to Gettysburg is very important, because we're fighting the same forces that were taking down the Union back in that period. The same British promoted Confederate, at that time, the Confederacy. So what you saw in this was a determination to fight from the state legislative level. Now, the Constitution of the United States says that it's the state legislatures that decide how the electors are decided, and whatever election processes are in place that decide the elections, the state legislature could change that. And given the unconstitutionality of what the governor and the Secretary of State and the democratically dominated Pennsylvania Supreme Court did, on Monday, a resolution is going to be introduced into the state legislature to grant back the power to pick the delegates to the electors, to pick the electors for Pennsylvania, which are 20 electors, back to the House of Representatives. So this is a whole new terrain. This has never been done since 1876. So this is actually, if it goes through, this is going to freak everybody out, because the claim is that they can't do it because the state legislatures had passed previously a law that determined how the electors would be chosen. But do the state legislatures have the power to alter that if they think the election was a fraud? And that's a whole nother dimension in this situation. So similar hearings are going to be held in other states. I believe in Arizona, Nevada, perhaps Michigan. I'm not sure of all the states. But if you start to do it, so that's a whole other dimensionality to the situation. So what is going on is the beginning of something, of a resistance, a resistance to not just the vote fraud, but what's coming in with the vote fraud, which is hardcore fascism. Because if they can fix the ballots and they can fix the elections, and there's nothing you can do about it, then that you are no longer in a republic. You're no longer in a democratic republic. You are in something else. And then when you consider that this is the prerequisite of removing Trump, who is the duly elected, who was elected as president, if the votes were to be counted, he is a legitimate president. So you're basically running a coup. It's not that Biden won an election. It's an actual coup d'etat. Trump will still be thereafter, if he does not stay in office past January 20th, he will still be, in effect, the legitimate president of the United States, even if he is not directly occupying the White House. And from his position as the legitimate president of the United States, he can mobilize the population in a massive resistance to what's coming down. So what's coming down? Well, on a global scale, it's the Great Reset. It's collapsing the dollar and putting countries under a central bank dictatorship, where the central bank decides what governments do. And this is what the Biden administration would do. And then they would go green and start to squeeze. And the purpose of this vote fraud and the purpose of putting Biden in there is to crush the population, because what the U.S. population is the greatest threat to the British Empire. Losing control of the United States is the greatest threat to the British Empire, and they have control. And by running this massive vote fraud operation, they have intensified that control. And by moving with the central bankers' dictatorship after Trump is out with digital currencies, they are even further centralizing that control. And they're coordinating that with the massive operations being run through the social media giants, through Google and through Twitter and through the social media giants, of massive censorship. So they're moving in that direction. So you have the surveillance state, you have the corporate elite, and you have the financial system now coming together in with this scarecrow in the White House, potentially in the White House, to crush the American people. Now, the question is, will the American people accept being crushed, or are they going to fight? Is Trump going to concede, or is he going to fight? This is now going to be the issue. So this is why it's a 1775 moment. It's a question of whether people are going to fight or not. All these elected officials, all these politicians, they're going to have to decide: are you going to just cave in, or are you going to fight? And this is the real issue. And getting that fight going, when people have to fight, then they have to figure things out. They have to learn. They have to become educated. They have to educate themselves. And this is the potential to transform a new leadership, to create a new leadership within the U.S. population that could later take over. Trump came into the White House with no secondary leadership. Now we can create in this process regardless of whether Trump goes in or not, he still stays in or not, he's still a legitimately elected president. However, it's the secondary leadership that's going to be created in this fight, and you're not going to qualify anybody except to the degree to which they're willing to fight. It's the secondary leadership that is important, and so that's really what's important here. This is what makes it the 1775 moment. We are now up against an occupation. Even if Trump stays in office past January 20, it's still an occupation. Our nation is still being occupied financially, media-wise, in every which way. We're an occupied nation by the globalists, by the New World Order, by this global system, which is also doing the same to Europe. And it appears that they've also pretty much come into some understanding with China. So China may be going along with this. So that's another aspect of this. So this resistance is very important. And it's whether or not people will cave in and just give in and say, I surrender. I'm going to live in hell. My children are going to live in hell. My physical existence is more important than fighting. Then you have to ask yourself, what are you living for? What do you have to live for? That's the whole point. There's no future. Your children have no future. What's the point of living if you're not going to fight? If you're going to fight, you still have a life. And that's the whole point. And we're in that situation where a large percentage of the, or a significant percentage of the U.S. population is going to have to make that decision and commit themselves to a war, to a battle. And that, I think, defines why this is our 1775 moment. Because in 1775, nobody had any idea that you could win the War of Independence against the most powerful enemy on the planet. Well, we have no guarantee in 2020 and going into 2021 that we can do the same. Even if Trump stays in office, we have no guarantee. But it's a question of that process. And that is why we're in the 1775 moment, which I think Sidney Powell correctly put together. So I hope to see you next week, and thank you for tuning in.